What's a new release book that's on your radar right now? Hi friends and readers, again, another week, another reading vlog. As someone who works full-time, 40 hours a week, I do work from home some, so there's a little bit more flexibility on how much I get to read. Not because I work from home, but because my 8 to 5 is just that, 8 to 5, and I don't have to drive home sometimes or drive to work in the mornings. So a lot of my reading and filming is done on my lunch break, like right now, or after work. I can start reading almost immediately after 5 o'clock if I want. And with that, I try to read 2 books every week, or that just tends to be how much I read in a week based off of reading being my hobby and then bringing you along with me in a reading vlog. This week, there are some new releases that I've been hearing some buzz about, and I decided let's go ahead and pick both of them up in 1 week because why not? My TBR is all digital except for when I know I'm gonna read those books, and these new releases I knew I was gonna read. Let's get started with the first newer release that's on my list, and that's going to be Tropesick by Lauren Oki. We are back from reading. It is now, what is it? Today's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, I'm on my lunch break, and this week, the first book I'm picking up is from an author who I originally heard a good bit of buzz about due to their debut novel, and that's called The Best Worst Thing. This author is Lauren Oki. We're gonna talk a little bit about this debut novel and why we're reading this week's book. The Best Worst Thing falls in the romance genre, so if you read a lot of romance, there's a good chance that you've heard of The Best Worst Thing. I myself gave it a 5 stars. Let's see, I read that book back in April, so really not that long ago. And I read it because I'd heard a ton of buzz about The Best Worst Thing and it being an emotional romance. Because you know, when you read in the romance category, there's a lot of different types of romance. You got sports romance, you got fluffy, bingeable romance, and you've got more emotional, heavier romances. And I had heard some recommendations that this one was very emotional and I wanted to give it a go, and I did, and really, really enjoyed it. It has been one of my favorite books so far this year, especially one of my favorite romance books. That book was also on Kindle Unlimited at the time, so it made it really easy to pick up. And part of the reason I wanted to pick it up is because I'd been seeing it all over. It was very buzzworthy on my algorithm, and the bookish creators and the bookish people I follow were recommending it. And I also knew that Lauren Oki had a new release at the time, so this was back in April, coming out in the next few months, and I wanted to go ahead and read their debut novel, see if I liked it in preparation for a new release. And because I absolutely loved it, I knew that I was gonna pick up this new book, which is what we're reading this week, and that is Tropesick by Lauren Oki. This is the cover, which I absolutely love. I love what we're doing here. It's very explanatory. Is that the right word? Is that how you say it? It explains a lot about this book, is what I mean. I had been seeing this new release cover floating around back in April. Again, it inspired me to read that first novel by Lauren Oki, and here we are. I did have to purchase this book because it was not on Kindle Unlimited like their first novel. I did buy it. I knew I would be okay with buying it though, since I really enjoyed The Best Worst Thing. Now this new release, let's see, it just recently came out. Tropesick was released on June 16th, 2026. It is June 23rd, so it has literally been exactly a week from today. I read a little bit on my lunch break yesterday, not too much, and then last night absolutely binged it sitting right here. Read a little bit this morning before work with my cats out on the patio, and now it's lunch again, and we're on page 213. I have what I think made it past halfway through this book. Absolutely have devoured it. Chapter 45, and there's only a total of 393 pages. So yes, we have made it over halfway because it's just under 400 pages. And this book too falls in the romance category. Tropesick, if you can imagine what that means, you're probably reading in between the correct lines. It says forced proximity, grumpy sunshine, brother's best friend, girl next door. I picked this up too in hopes that maybe it would also be a bit more of an emotional romance like their first novel was. I tend to really enjoy more emotional ones than I do, I don't know, sometimes you're in the mood for an emotional one, and maybe sometimes you're in the mood for a more bingeable, light-hearted, fluffy book. And this week I was in the mood for emotional. And here we we are following Katie and Tyler, so it is dual point of view. And not only that, but we also have a little bit of now versus then timelines. There are some chapters that flash back into the timeline a few years, and that's because Katie and Tyler have some history. In the current day, they actually haven't seen each other in about 7 or 8 years. That was bookmarked by Katie's brother, or Katie's older brother, dying, and Tyler was Katie's older brother's best friend. Also, Tyler lived next door. So back to the cover, you can imagine all of the tropes happening right now. They haven't talked in so long, so many years. Something clearly happened with the death of her brother, and alongside of the death of her brother between these two characters, and we just don't know what happened. Now, all these years later, Katie is an established author, so she is out writing books and novels, and in particular currently is ghostwriting. So she's writing a novel under a pen name for a more famous author, and her writing partner dropped out at the very last minute, and they had to bring in a new person to help write this current novel. You guessed it, that new person is Tyler. Tyler didn't realize it was going to be Katie when he signed up for the gig, and now they're both in this situation ghostwriting this novel, and of course it's a romance novel, and Tyler doesn't believe in romance, doesn't believe in love, hates all these tropes, does not get it. So now he's stuck writing these romances and stuck writing about these tropes, and now these tropes are also happening to him in real life alongside writing this novel. So with that update, I am going to keep reading. I imagine I'll finish this in the next 24 hours. I have nothing to do after work this afternoon, so I plan to, again, probably sit right here and binge the rest of this book. I'll come back to you with my thoughts on it, on what happens with Katie and Tyler without spoiling what happens, but how I feel about it. Talk to you when I finish this book. We've made it to Wednesday. It is 12:02. I'm on my lunch break. I pretty much go on my lunch break 12 to 1 every day, and as soon as I do that, I start filming updates or reading. Here we are, and the update is that we have finished Tropesick by Lauren Oki. I read a lot last night on the recliner, as I said I would, and then I read and finished the book. I only had a few pages left this morning before work. I've actually been getting up at like 7 and getting ready by 7:30, and I work from home today, so I had 20 to 30 minutes of my life to just read, and it's been nice actually waking up on time instead of rolling out of bed at 7:45 and starting work at 8 o'clock. We were able to finish this book and honestly flew through it, and I have my phone because I have some thoughts on this that I was writing down as I was reading so we could go back and talk about them. Obviously, from what we know about Katie and Tyler in this book, that they hadn't talked in so many years, her brother died, and something happened between the two of them, and now suddenly we're ghostwriting on this book together. They had a lot that they were going to have to communicate about and communicate to the reader for us to understand, hey, so what happened and how can we get to the other side of this? A lot of things happened in this book that I was not anticipating, threw me off completely, and I've honestly never seen this type of thing happen in a book in the way it happened here, and that's me being very vague so I don't spoil what the ending is like. What I will say is, as I was reading this, I was like, this feels vaguely familiar. I do feel like a plot scenario where you're ghostwriting for someone. I feel like I'd kind of read that before, and then the whole time it took me the whole book to get through it, like, oh, it kind of feels like Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, in that they are writing for someone who has disappeared for years and years, a very famous person, and they're writing their biography or something like that, or they're telling their story. This felt somewhat similar to that. If you've ever read Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry and now are reading Tropesick, let me know if you feel the same, if there's some sort of connection there that I couldn't just quite put my finger on, because clearly there's two people also writing a book for someone, not about someone though. I think what was really interesting and why a reader, someone who is taking in book content is what I'm trying to say, would probably enjoy this book, because the author does a fun thing where she sort sort of plays on the commentary that readers have in book videos and in reviews and what people say about the romance category and what readers say about romance books. And she can do that because her characters are authors. So it almost seemed like you're getting author's perspective from the characters who are also authors themselves, playing at what people have to say about the romance genre. And also there are so many calls to romance books and authors that you're probably familiar with. There's a quote about Emily Henry Beechread in here, Kennedy Ryan, Tessa Bailey. Those are just the ones that come to mind when I remember all the dog ears I had for the callbacks to the romance genre. Now, let's talk about how the first book I read by this author was a very big emotional romance. This book is still pretty emotional. I don't know if it was as heavy as I remember their first novel to be, but definitely some trigger warnings in here. We talk a lot about addiction and grief, and if you even read the author's note at the end or the acknowledgements, you can see how important it was for this author to tell a story around addiction through the main character's brother. So there is certainly some meaning and impact behind that part of the plot and the story. Honestly, I flew through the first half of this book and I just finishing it, I don't know how I feel about it. I genuinely don't know how I feel about it. I'm probably somewhere between a 3-star and a 4-star. So definitely not a 5-star like I got from the first book, but I hate comparing author to author or book to book from an author. It's hard not to do because of course their book is all you know about them, especially for their debut novel being a 5-star. This one, I just didn't connect to the main characters like I thought I might, but I still had a really good time reading it and of course flew through it in like 2 days. And now we are gonna move on to the next book this week, and this is another author that I read their debut novel and have heard so much buzz around them, around that debut novel, and they have since had a new release. And so we're gonna be picking up a book by Sarah DeMoss that is The Burning Side. I'm gonna update you later on once I've gotten into this book and let you know what it's all about. The next buzzworthy book that we're reading this week is none other than a book by Sarah DeMoss, and that book is called The Burning Side by Sarah DeMoss. And you'll see on here it says best-selling author of The Bright Years, which we're going to talk about The Bright Years in a moment because that book is the reason why I wanted to pick up this book. And here she is, The Bright Years. I was absolutely obsessed with this cover. You'll see in a different reading vlog that I read, if you go and watch that reading vlog, that I read this book and I mentioned how this book cover just felt so springy and so warm and so inviting, and then this book slapped me right in the face and said, no, I'm not. All jokes aside, The Bright Years was the first book I picked up by this author, and as I mentioned earlier, that The Bright Years is actually their debut novel. I feel like I remember seeing that Sarah DeMoss had her hands on something years and years and years ago that shows up under Goodreads but wasn't actually their first novel, if I'm remembering correctly, and that The Bright Years is what we're calling the debut novel. It was a shorter book in that nowadays I feel like you're picking up books that are between 400 and 600 pages. This was not one of those, as you can tell, a pretty thin one, which is sometimes what you want to pick up for a palate cleanser to be more bingeable, but this book is very heavy, very hard, lots of trauma, lots of grief, lots of trigger warnings. I had seen anyone and everyone that I follow that I enjoy recommendations from read The Bright Years, give it a 5 stars. I myself gave it a 4 stars. I did really enjoy the story and who we followed and the writing style of Sarah DeMoss. It came out in 2025, so really just last year, so I didn't pick it up too late, but I especially picked it up because I knew that Sarah DeMoss had a release date out for another book and I wanted to read their debut novel, almost identical to what happened with Lauren Oakey and the first book I read this week. A 4-star is still a great rating for me, so I knew that I would pick up The Burning Side. I had been trying to find The Bright Years back when I read this book all over the place. My local bookstore, my library, eLibby, I just couldn't get my hands on it. So I finally had to bite the bullet and purchase it. And boy, is my wallet hurting recently because we've also had to purchase The Burning Side. My local library has not obtained a copy of The Burning Side just yet. And my local library tends to get newer release books a few months later. And this is just one of those scenarios I didn't want to wait. I enjoyed the first book, and so I decided I'd spend my money on book number 2 by this author. Book number 2, just like their first book, is literary fiction. So if if you like the literary fiction genre or maybe a little contemporary fiction, then I think you'll enjoy this author and their books so far. For The Burning Side, I am expecting some emotional heavy vibes that I got from their first book. So far, that's exactly what's happening. I'd say for any of these types of books, you probably really need to be in a good headspace for them and know what you're getting yourself into. And if you're someone who wants to know about trigger warnings, then definitely look those up. Well, their first book, I didn't even tell you how many pages The Bright Years was. Not a lot. It was less than 270. It was 271 pages. Chef's Kiss. This book itself is gonna be 320 pages, so a little bit longer than their first one, but 320 is literally the perfect amount of pages for me, honestly. Anywhere between 300 and 400, and that's what I like. So I had mentioned that we're already getting sad, emotional, and heavy, so let's talk about what The Burning Side is even about. And so far on The Burning Side, we are following multiple perspectives. We have perspectives of two of our main characters, April and Leo, and we'll talk about April and Leo. But we also have the perspective of April's mom, Deb, and I think so far that's the only perspectives we have. By the way, I made it to part 2 now in this book, and that is not a chapter because the chapters are based off the names, not like numbers. We are at page 141, so we are just approaching halfway through this book, just a few pages short. Not only are we getting multiple point of views, we're also getting multiple timelines. We are getting present day timeline and we are getting past, so a then timeline. And both of these timelines are focusing on one big event that's happened, and that is a house fire. Our two main characters, Leo and April, are married and they just had a house fire. Now, non-spoiler, spoiler alert, literally just before this house caught fire and they had to escape with their kids and lose out on their belongings, Leo asked his wife, April, for a divorce. So something has happened in their relationship and then boom, house fire. So now they're both having to go stay with April's parents and their two children are there. This is a full packed house and they are walking around the fact that their house literally just burned down and they can't be in it, but her husband also just asked her for a divorce. And Leo, the husband, is kind of torn between it feels so wrong to try to go back to this relationship because I asked for a divorce, but it also feels so wrong to walk away from this relationship because we have kids and our house just burned down, hence The Burning Side. So the past timeline is going back into April and Leo meeting, gaining their relationship, building their bonds, getting married, having kids. The present timeline is centered around the house just burned down, and then we're jumping 2 days post house fire, 3 days post house fire, things of that nature. And then again, I said we've already gotten the perspective of the mom because April and Leo are staying with April's mom and the mom is the grandparent in this scenario. I told my boyfriend, I actually didn't even tell him. He picked up this book when I ordered it and it came in the mail. He picked it up and read the summary and was like, girl, why are you reading about a house fire? Because I have this not so irrational fear of having my house burn down, having my cats in my house when it burns down, anything of that nature or related. He's like, why would you put yourself through reading a book about a house fire? And at least in this, they have honed in on what caused the fire and it could have been prevented very easily, so I feel okay reading about it. Anyways, we're gonna keep reading, and once I finish this book, I'm gonna give you my updates on if it is sad, heavy, and emotional like the first 50% has been, and how we feel about this book by Sarah DeMoff. I'm sure it'll be a good book, but I have to, oh my god, emotionally prepare myself to finish it before it finishes me. Today's Saturday and I have finished The Burning Side by Sarah DeMoff. I actually finished this yesterday, which there were clips of. So Friday, I feel like I, for this week of reading, really concentrated on reading after work in the evenings instead of being on my phone. And I had a really good time doing that. It felt so peaceful going to sleep this week. Try it out if you don't already. I'm gonna put this right here. And I have some notes on my phone on my thoughts. So going to pull those up so we can talk about The Burning Side by Sarah DeMoff. Let's just start by saying this book is sad. This book is so sad. There was a point where I was bawling my eyes out. I wasn't filming a clip of myself reading. I was out on the patio with the cats. I was probably 80% of the way through, and there was this scene with the mom, which I'm so glad we got the mom's point of view, the perspective of Deb, the mom of our two main characters, or one of our main characters' mom, I guess mother-in-law to the other. I'm so glad we got Deb's point of view. I think it was very impactful seeing her experience of this couple going through the fire, living in her house, and what's going on in her own life and her history and what it was like raising those kids pre-April. I was reading this scene in her perspective, and you'll learn if you read this book, oh my gosh, her storyline, so upsetting and so sad in so many different ways. Started bawling my eyes out, was not expecting it. This scene really got to me, and how the author was writing this scene. I think I filmed a clip, I'm not sure if I'm gonna put it in, of me actually like really crying, like tears dropping from my chin. Probably will put it in, but I don't know. This book just covers so much grief and trauma, postpartum depression, COVID is talked about in here. Just some real life crap, honestly. And I think when people say that they want literary fiction, they want real life, they want to feel like this is something that they could imagine happening in their lives. They don't want fairy tale, they don't want third act conflict and random tropes and breakups. I think that this is exactly what that is, almost like 95% of the way there. And oftentimes I think that literary fiction or contemporary fiction might not be satisfying to the reader because they think they want the real life, they think they want the hard stuff, but then they read it and they're like, wait a second, actually, I need to escape from real life. I need to escape from these things. This book gets heavy, and it gets heavy fast. Now, there is something that happens in this book that I know a lot of readers don't like to read about. In fact, someone might read what happens. I guess it's kind of a trope. They'd say, nope, I'm gonna rate that a bad rating because of that. I didn't mind it in this one because, again, it's real life, and I can't say what it is without spoiling it, but hey, I think what I really enjoyed through these characters, Deb, April, Leo, going post-fire, post-wanting a divorce, and working through all of those things simultaneously, which, hello, really hard to do, is also the perspective of our mom character, Deb, in the end. Author is able to encapsulate this feeling of what it's like to have a house or a home and then move out of that house or home, or that house or home is burned down to the ground, something of that nature, and either is rebuilt or some other family moves in, and you spent all of these years in this space that you call home, and all these memories and attachments, and how you painted the walls this color, and how the flower bloomed in this season, and you're so attached to it, and then suddenly not yours, and now you're thinking about this other family, these other people making a life there. Like, what's it look like for them? Do they know about the creaky floorboard? And I just loved how the author encapsulated that feeling, especially as someone who's grown up and moved and left spaces that I called home, like my college dorm or my college apartment with my best friends. I really appreciated that. I think if there's one thing that Sarah DeMoff is going to do is, so far in both of the books I've read by this author, really capture feelings, and I think that you could imagine these things happening to yourself because they write these simple yet complex sentences that really show what's happening in the reader's mind or the character's mind, and thus your mind. A really good book. It's not a 5-star, but it's really close to it, probably a 4.5-star for me. I quite enjoyed it despite how heavy and hard it is. Every day it goes by, I feel like I'm gravitating more and more to enjoying literary fiction and contemporary fiction, historical fiction. I love reading. Really glad I picked up these buzzworthy books this week, and I am going on vacation next week, so I'm just gonna be mood reading. I don't even think I'm gonna be filming the next few days as I am going on vacation. So that's all. Bye for now.